Now to a wonderful bit of news. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, he's already been vindicated years ago. Everything is said about COVID, the COVID measures turned out to be right. But 4 years ago, Josh, he was not only being defamed extensively, he was placed on a COVID blacklist on Twitter, having his very sensible advice censored and suppressed. Today, he has been a confirmed director of the NIH, the National Institute of Health. This is such a dramatic turnaround. What changes is he going to institute?
So first of all, Dr. Bhattacharya is a wonderful human being. I actually know him a bit in a personal capacity. Before I was senior editor at large Newsweek, I was the opinion editor. I ran the op-ed section. We ran any number of op-eds from Dr. Bhattacharya. I would email him edits and so forth there. Very pleasant man, just a good human being who was severely mistreated by the powers that be, as you alluded to, during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was one of the heroes who came out charging with the Great Barrington Declaration early on the pandemic, basically calling into question all the lockdowns and the masking there. And as you correctly note, time has proven him completely correct there. So a good human being who's in a very important position there. I think among other things, I mean, related to what I was just talking about there, he is going to help put in place some very different procedures when it comes to future pandemics. I mean, look, we all know the pandemics happen. That's kind of just the way the human history has worked for thousands of years there. So among other things, he's definitely going to put in very different practices, different habits. I mean, we're not going to have the forced lockdowns, obviously. We're not going to have the mandatory vaccines there or anything like that there. Frankly, Rita, I hope that the NIH, working probably with the CDC and potentially other agencies there, I'm not sure that we've actually gotten to the bottom of some of the fraud that, in my opinion, likely existed when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers themselves. So here in Florida, where I live, our governor, Ron DeSantis, initiated a statewide inquiry to this maybe about a year and a half ago or so. It came back fairly inconclusive there. I would like to see a federal inquiry into whether or not these vaccines have actually committed mass fraud on a national scale. That strikes me as one thing that could potentially be within Dr. Bhattacharya's bailiwick there. But from a public health perspective there is a need to get the American people back to believing in their public health authorities again. And frankly, you could do a heck of a lot worse than someone who has basically batted 1,000 and gotten it totally right over the past 5 years.
He put his reputation on the line. He put his professional standing on the line, and he was vindicated, but it was rough there for several years, the way he was treated by authorities, the way he was treated by segments of the media was frankly disgusting. Now, we've played already some clips of the NPR CEO floundering as she tried to answer questions about the extreme bias of the news organisation, a taxpayer-funded news organisation that has 87 editorial positions filled by registered Democrats in DC and 0 by Republicans.
In the DC area, editorial positions at NPR, he said he found 87 registered Democrats, 0 Republicans. Is that accurate?
We do not track the numbers or the voter registration.
October 2020, the New York Post had the Hunter Biden laptop story, and one of those editors, I guess one of those 87 Democrat editors, said this: we don't want to waste our time on stories that are not really stories. We don't want to waste the listeners' and readers' times on stories that are just pure distractions. Was that a pure distraction story?
Our current editorial leadership believes that was a mistake, as do I.
Josh, that they think it's relevant now. When it actually mattered, when it was influencing an election result, they were pushing disinformation, trying to discredit that story.
Rita, it's completely inexcusable. Like beyond inexcusable. I don't even know what the argument is, frankly, for the American taxpayer to subsidize NPR and PBS in the year 2025. It is insane. It is an anachronistic throwback to a bygone era, to an era where TV was frankly an up and coming technology, and it was competing back then with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the fireside chats, and maybe the government wanted to put a direct investment to try to stimulate the growth of public access television there. But whatever merit this argument may or may not have had 60, 70, 80 years ago or whatnot there, it has utterly and completely collapsed in today's day and age, where you have left-wing lunatics like this woman who are presiding over a taxpayer-funded agency there. You know, Uri Berliner, who left NPR last year, he subsequently has become closely involved with Barry Weiss's Free Press organization there. He has been very candid and forthright about what he saw behind the scenes there, and it is bad stuff. I mean, talk about monolithic ideological groupthink within the newsroom there. This is nothing other than a typical MSNBC style left-wing hack activist, quote unquote, media organization. The only difference is that they get taxpayer dollars. That's a pretty important difference. Let's end that tomorrow, I said.
And I think Berliner came out and said he has spoken with the CEO about these issues, because I think she gave evidence there that she would have liked to have talked to him about some of his findings. So, yeah, her memory seems to be very sketchy indeed, and that's a fairly generous interpretation of what we heard today. What's the latest, Josh? You mentioned that security breach that saw the Atlantic's Josh Goldberg added to a group chat on Signal discussing airstrikes in Yemen. What more have we found out about that in the last 24 hours?
So we're still trying to figure out exactly how this happened, specifically how Jeffrey Goldberg got on the Signal chat. Now, Rita, there's multiple things going on here. There are some people that are having a meltdown because high-ranking officials were using Signal, the app itself there. I don't actually have a tremendous issue with that, to be honest with you. It was actually the Biden administration that basically installed Signal on government devices there. All else considered, Signal actually is among the more secure and encrypted messaging apps out there. So I think those people are frankly barking up the wrong tree. The question that I still am waiting to hear a cogent and coherent answer on is how a left-wing professional activist posing as a journalist like Jeffrey Goldberg somehow found his way into a group chat with people like Mike Waltz, J.D. Vance. It's obviously not a good look. I mean, we should not pretend like it is. It's obviously a terrible look. This could have gone horrifically wrong
terrible.
in about a million different ways there. In my opinion, what the administration should do is stop issuing it's kind of only semi-coherent crisis communications. You should basically just have a fall guy, figure out how this happened. Maybe he's a Mike Waltz staffer in the NSA's office. Make that guy the fall guy, fire him, vow to do better next time. And at that point, I think the story's over.
I think there needs to be some sort of accountability, because this is a stuff up. And you're right, Jeffrey Goldberg is a far left activist masquerading as a journalist and editor. He was pushed all sorts of disinformation, including the Fine People hoax, the Suckers and Losers hoax. There's a whole bunch of them going back several years. So for him to be the one who's inadvertently added to this list in particular is just wild. Now, let's go to a report from CBS into what is happening in Boston. Tom Homan, the Trump administration's border czar, accused authorities in Boston of releasing illegal immigrants charged with violent crimes, releasing them back into the community. And it turns out that CBS found plenty of examples of this. We've got just a few to mention here. We had a Guatemalan charged with 3 counts of aggravated child rape, released on $7,500 bail, Josh. Another man charged with aggravated child rape. The victim's age was 9 or below. Again, $7,500 bail. Others released with 0 bail, including a Honduran charged with assault, robbery, released on his own reconnaissance with 0 bail. So many other examples there. Someone charged with fentanyl trafficking, released on a $4,000 bond before ICE could even arrive. How many other cases are like this across the country where authorities are frustrating what ICE is trying to do, what the Trump administration is attempting to do, and releasing these dangerous people back into the community on small bond or no bond to continue with their criminality?
So first of all, let me point out that this is in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You mentioned a fentanyl trafficker. This actually hits home on a very personal note. My cousin, may his memory be a blessing, actually overdosed and died from fentanyl in Massachusetts about 7 years ago. So this story actually hits pretty home for me, actually, that Massachusetts authorities are letting free actually the kind of people, in this case, the kind of illegal aliens, the likes of which tragically resulted in my cousin's overdeath 7 years ago there. So this is just horrific stuff. Massachusetts is a Democrat-governed state. It's been a Democrat state for longer than I've been alive. I fear, Rita, that this is actually pretty common throughout the United States, especially in these far left jurisdictions, places like Massachusetts and California. I mean, Gavin Newsom's kind of sort of changing his tune a little bit there. No one should believe a darn thing the guy says, but you're still going to have some very far left holdouts like the city of Boston, like the city of Chicago, Illinois there. Fundamentally, as a matter of constitutional law, it is the United States federal government that has the duty to enforce the federal immigration laws. And the state governments are not allowed to undermine the enforcement of those immigration laws there. Now, they cannot necessarily be forced to do so, but you could actually offer some very clever carrot and stick. So, for instance, the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi can basically condition all federal funding of local police departments, because the federal government does subsidize a lot of local police departments. You can say, we're only going to give you that funding on the condition that you actively assist us with federal immigration enforcement. That's the kind of clever policymaking that I would like to see a little bit more of, to try and put these so-called sanctuary jurisdictions back in their place.
Josh Hammer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rita.